This book, The Remains of Japhet, was written in 1767, authored by a British doctor, James Parsons, a member of the Fellowship of the Royal Society of Antiquaries, as it was referred to back then. Today it's known as the Fellowship of the Royal Society, which I talk a lot about on this channel because the Fellowship of the Royal Society is part of the club. So James Parsons, the author of this book, was in the club. The book was printed in London by Scholar Press. I'm glad I found this book because it highlights the genealogy of the royals and venerates the ancient Scythian noble class, which I also talk about a lot on this channel. So I'm going to review this book and also another book authored by the same author, which highlights a specific aspect of the religion of their priest class, which I have been covering lately. And here's the other book, titled A Mechanical and Critical Inquiry into the Nature of Hermaphrodites by James Parsons, Fellow of the Royal Society. This one is written to Sir Hans Sloane, President of the Royal Society, published in 1741. This hermaphrodite book says that in ancient Italy, religious and wise men consulted the hermaphrodite priest class, which we already know because their mother goddess was Cybele, a hermaphrodite. It outlines an account of one such child who was born in Campania, Italy, of, quote, monstrous size, both male and female. As covered in prior videos, the ancient royal Scythians also had an androgynous priest class and castrated some of their males to create some of those priests. These androgynous priests were regarded at the top of the hierarchy in the Scythian culture. This book says that several Jewish rabbis and most of the Hebrews before them were of the opinion that Adam was first made androgynous. It says, these opinions gave birth to many others afterwards as well among the pagan philosophers as among many Christian divines, some of whom in the time of Pope Innocent III were followers of rabbis, that they thought sexes in Adam would never have been divided if he had not sinned, which was granting that Adam was created an hermaphrodite and that two sexes were taken asunder afterwards. End of quote. So the mention here of Pope Innocent and his followers believing that Adam was androgynous is very interesting with regards to the recent Conclave movie and book, also written by an author who was Order of the British Empire, in which the elected pope of that book and movie was also androgynous with female reproductive organs, and in that story decided to keep them because it was, quote, the way God created her. What you will find about these club writers and other media promoters is that they frequently reference the Bible. For example, this author, James Parsons, in his book, The Remains of Japhet, references Noah, his descendants, Moses, and the flood. But they always put their own spin on it in favor of their religion and their genealogies. One example in this book is the author's favor of the ancient royal Scythians. This noble class and the warrior class were large, almost 7 feet tall, with pale skin, light eyes, and red hair. I read that the original mutation for light eyes, called OCA2, arose in the Black Sea region of Europe, and the Black Sea region is the region the Scythians inhabited. Sir Henry Rawlinson, another Knight of the Crown, wrote this about one of the ways that the Scythians obtained an even larger size was by drinking horse milk. So he wrote, quote, and this is the way of their getting it, referring to the milk. Taking pipes of bone like flutes, they thrust these into the secret parts of the mares, and mares are female horses who have just given birth, and blowing into them, some blowing and some milking. So I wonder if this is why Anne Rice has the reference to Lasher drinking so much milk in the Mayfair Witches series. Lasher is a shape-shifting demon spirit summoned in the 1600s by a Scottish witch, but he was originally a tall, ancient intelligent being also known as Saint Ashlar. Ash. Depicted as a 7-foot tall with hazel eyes, which Anne Rice calls a Taltos, which is a race of beings with attributes predating humans. So that sounds like she is referring to ancient Nephilim offspring, like the ancient royal Scythians who currently likely present as demons. So this book, The Remains of Japhet, is written in Old English, so I didn't read the entire thing, but enough to get some general ideas of what it is about, and I will link it and the other Parsons book in the description of this video. The topics of the book, The Remains of Japhet, include the origin of European language, the identity of Gog and Magog, and the origination of royal Scythians, which this author links all of that together, meaning he links ancient royal Scythians to Gog and Magog and also links the Indo-European languages to them also. Gary Wayne also says that Indo-Aryan European languages was a Scythian language or language of the giants. Parsons wrote that the King of Great Britain is the only monarch on earth descended from the most ancient race of noble Scythian kings. And that explains why European heraldry is based on Scythian artwork of animal predation. And at that time, the King of Great Britain, at the time of this book, the King of Great Britain would have been King Charles III. I'm sorry, King George III. But the current King Charles III also claims descent from a Scythian, Vlad of Wallachia. So before I get into more of this book, I'm going to play part of a video I did which correlates Roman emperors to the papal priest class. So it correlates the nobility to the papal priest class because that part is important to history and referenced in 2 different books by the same author. So I'll play some of that video.
In a prior video, I talked about Lake Nimi and how it was home to a Scythian king or king of the forest, home of Diana's mirror, or the temple of Diana in the sacred holy woods near Rome. And another researcher whose ancestors are from there also said it's supposed to be some legendary portal, but I couldn't find any info about that. But in that video, I mentioned the Principate, or Roman Senate, took over the title of the King of Forest from the Scythian king, supposedly took it over from them at Lake Nimi. And then I mentioned a connection of the Principate to the noble papacy, but I didn't do a good job of making the connection of the Roman emperors of that time to the papacy, so I want to do that now. So the emperors of that time who had their palaces around that lake were Caligula, Julius, and Augustus Caesar, and others, starting around 27 BC. And these emperors are part of the Julio-Claudian dynasty. And that noble Orsini family, according to their own legend, the Orsini are descended from the Julio-Claudian dynasty of ancient Rome. So the Orsini family is descended from these emperors, these Roman emperors, the noble Orsini family. And we found out that Lake Nimi was, at least at one time, at least in the 1800s, owned by the Orsini family of the black nobility. And before I had said that the Orsinis were the family of the Black Pope, but I guess he's referred to as the Gray Pope, this Pepe Orsini, and the most powerful Jesuit over the more well-known commoner Pope Francis. They say he's a commoner, and whoever the Black Pope is, which, if they are over it, that would make sense since they're the ennobled bloodline, according to them. So there's that connection from the Scythian Nephilim descendants to the Roman emperors, directly to this Orsini noble papacy. And here I just...
One of that Julio-Claudian dynasty was Tiberius, which they've named Palantir software. I did a video about that. So, in other videos, I've covered the fact also that Sir James Fraser, Knight of the Crown, in his book, The Golden Bough, references the transfer of the worship of Diana, the Mother Goddess, from Lake Nemi in Rome to St. Peter's Basilica. So I'm going to play another part of that video now, which has a reference connecting the royal kingship to the priest class from another old book, an alchemy book.
And here I found this book here. It's an old book, and I guess it's a book about alchemy. But this image is from a collection of that book. It's called Emblemata Nova. And it shows here, here you have the king's crown on one side, scepter, and a mitre hat on the other. You got this owl in the middle with the grail cup with bees around it. And it looks like that, maybe that what it's saying is this king over here, this is the AC, and then this is the false prophet. And I tried to read this cipher. It's Latin. It wasn't easy to figure out what that said, but it says, I think it says, I'm not at liberty to extend honors to the day and the day of deeds done. So anyway, if this does represent the AC and the false prophet, that kind of fits in with traditional prophecy teachings.
So, James Parsons, in his book, Remains of Japhet, says the language of Europe prior to Greek was Japhethan, synonymous with Scythian, Gomerian, and Magogian, which he says is the root of the Welsh, Scottish, and Irish languages, and was evident in their dialects in the 1700s. He wrote that Welsh, Scottish, and Irish were the only remaining unmixed children of Japhet in the world at that time, in the 1700s. So the sons of Japheth are listed in Genesis 10 and include Gomer and Magog. The sons of Gomer included Ashkenaz. It says in Genesis, by these were the isles of the Gentiles divided in their lands, everyone after his tongue, after their families in their nations. So I'm assuming their nation's tongue would have been their pre-flood tongue. According to Gary Wayne and others, Scythians are the most ancient noble tribe dating back to pre-flood and descended from what people refer to as Anunnaki, or ring lords. And even though mainstream history dates their origins only to 900 BC, but even Achilles was described by the Byzantine Leo the Deacon as a Scythian. And Achilles is believed to have lived in 1300 BC, a Trojan. So an example of another way this author venerates these Scythians is found in this passage where he says that his research of ancient history reflects the, quote, highest honor on the ancient noble Scythian inhabitants of these lands, meaning Wales, Ireland, and the Scottish Highlands, not only because of their antiquity of language, but also because of the glorious deeds of their ancestors, the learning of their antiquaries, poets, and philosophers who were influencers of mankind in the Western world after the deluge, and from whom knowledge of sciences has been transmitted to all of Europe. So that's spoken like a true member of the club. And he is not referring to regular Welsh, Irish, or Scottish people, and neither am I. He's referring to those elites who call themselves royals, who claim divine right to rule based on those originating clans and the worship of the fallen, who take instructions from the fallen. So why is he speaking so highly of ancient Scythians, who the Bible refers to as violent barbarians? The word Scythian is Greek. In Greek is skuths and is translated as a savage. Several sources mention barbaric practices such as drinking the blood of their conquered foes from their skulls. Ezekiel seems to select Scythians under the name of Gog as the symbol of earthly violence arrayed against the people of God. He depicts their avarice and violence in Ezekiel 38, 7 through 13, and fearful vengeance executed upon them in verses 14 through 23. So we can read that. Get ready, be prepared, you and all the hordes gathered about you, and take command of them. After many days you will be called to arms. In future years you will invade a land that has recovered from war, whose people were gathered from many nations to the mountains of Israel, which had long been desolate. They had been brought out from the nations, and now all of them live in safety. You and your troops and the many nations with you will go up, advancing like a storm, and you will be like a cloud covering the land. This is what the sovereign Lord says. On that day, thoughts will come into your mind, and you will devise an evil scheme. You will say, I will invade a land of unwalled villages. I will attack a peaceful and unsuspecting people, all of them living without walls and gates and bars. I will plunder and loot and turn my hand against the resettled ruins and the people gathered from the nations, rich in livestock and goods, living at the center of the land. Sheba and Dedan and the merchants of Tarshish and all her villages will say to you, have you come to plunder? Have you gathered your hordes to loot, to carry off silver and gold, to take away livestock and goods, and to seize much plunder? Therefore, Son of Man, prophesy and say to Gog, this is what the sovereign Lord says. In that day, when my people, Israel, are living in safety, will you not take notice of it? You will come from your place in the far north, you and many nations with you, all of them riding on horses, a great horde, a mighty army. You will advance against my people Israel like a cloud that covers the land. In days to come, Gog, I will bring you against my land so that the nations may know me when I am proved holy through you before their eyes. This is what the sovereign Lord says. You are the one I spoke of in former days by my servants of prophets of Israel, and at that time they prophesied for years that I would bring you against them. This is what will happen in that day. When Gog attacks the land of Israel, my hot anger will be aroused, declares the sovereign Lord. In my zeal and fiery wrath, I will declare at that time there shall be a great earthquake in the land of Israel. The fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, the beasts of the field, every creature that moves along the ground, and all the people on the face of the earth will tremble at my presence. The mountains will be overturned, the cliffs will crumble, and every wall will fall to the ground. I will summon a sword against Gog on all my mountains, declares the sovereign Lord. Every man's sword will be against his brother. I will execute judgment on him with plague and bloodshed. I will pour down torrents of rain, hailstones, and burning sulfur on him and on his troops and on the many nations with him. And so I will show my greatness and my holiness, and I will make myself known in the sight of many nations. Then they will know that I am the Lord. So the burial of the resulting corpses was in the valley of Hamon Gog. Ezekiel 39:11 reads, on that day I will give Gog a burial place in Israel in the valley of those who travel east of the sea. I will block the way of travelers because Gog and all his hordes will be buried there. So it will be called the valley of Hamon Gog. The imagery of Ezekiel has been transferred in the apocalypse to describe the final struggle between Christ and the Antichrist in Revelation 20, verses 7 through 10. It reads, when the 1,000 years are over, Satan will be released from his prison and will go out and deceive the nations in the four corners of the earth, Gog and Magog, and to gather them for battle. In number, they are like the sand on the seashore, meaning there's many of them. They marched across the breadth of the earth and surrounded the camp of God's people, the city he loves. but fire came down from heaven and devoured them. And the devil who deceived them, meaning deceived those in battle against God's people, was thrown into the lake of burning sulfur, where the beast and the false prophet have been thrown. They will be tormented day and night forever and ever. So that's what the Bible says. But as I mentioned before, these club people put their own spin on what the Bible says and on history in favor of their religion and their genealogies. For example, in this book, The Remains of Japhet, the author favors these ancient royal Scythians. He also writes that he followed the migrations of Noah's descendants to the places they occupied and increased their numbers as they departed from Armenia, where he writes that the Noah's Ark landed. And where is Armenia? It's right here, to the north of Iran and Iraq at the start of the Caucasus Mountains, which is the home of the Scythians, even as noted by mainstream historians. According to the biblical account in Genesis 11, Noah's descendants settled south of that area in the plains of Shinar, where the Tower of Babel was built. But Parsons writes that the building of Babel and the tearing down of the tower and the confusion and dispersion did not affect the descendants of Japheth or Shem, but was the fate of Nimrod's people only, the descendants of Ham only. But that's not true. This directly contradicts the Bible. The Bible says that all nations and tongues were dispersed as a result of the confusion of languages at the Tower of Babel. Genesis 11:9 states, "Therefore is the name of it called Babel, because the Lord did there confound the language of all the earth," all. "And from there did the Lord scatter them abroad on the face of all the earth." But in his book, Parsons refers to Homer a lot for his information. And Homer was a Greek Beast Empire bard who wrote about the genealogies of his heroes to coincide with their version of history of the world and make them out to be heroic. And so they've been doing this all along, making heroes of their ancestors who worship the fallen, lionizing them historically. And this author, Parsons, was doing that same thing in the 1700s with the Scythians, and Homer was doing it in ancient Greece, and it's being done today. And it'll be ramping up in the end times, which is why I do these videos, one of the reasons. So we just saw that with the Conclave movie and the Hermaphrodite Pope, of the example I gave at the beginning. Parsons writes that the descendants of the Scythians migrated northwest through the Caucasus, and that part does appear to be true. He says in his book that all European nobles, the Celts, the Gauls, the Franks, the Etruscans, Dacians, Goths, Trojans, and even some tribes in Mexico and Peru were from Tartary. My theory is that Tartary, or the Tartarian Empire, was named for Tartarus because that's where their gods and ancestors were located. Not the regular people of these tribes. Not talking about regular people. I'm talking about the noble class, the ones who communicate with the invisible ones, which they do in part because of their genealogy, giving them their divine right to rule. Remember, Satan offered that to Jesus, all the kingdoms of the world, if he would bow down and worship him, and Jesus said no. But these people that I'm talking about are the ones who did not say no, not the regular people. And Jesus reigns anyway, which these people still do not get, I guess. But according to the Bible, specifically 2 Peter 2:4, the beings confined in Tartarus are the fallen angels who sinned. These angels abandoned their proper dwelling and were cast into Tartarus as a form of punishment, awaiting judgment. And Tartarus is described as a place of darkness and chains where these angels are held until the final judgment. So there's a lot more in this book, but I want to leave the video shorter so that everyone could just sit with that information as it relates to the Scythians and the priest class. And there's a playlist that I have titled Videos That Cover Scythians in Some Way or Another, and this is it. And this video will be added to that playlist. Thanks for listening.